Gracious and merciful God, we ask that for just a few minutes, you might give us some peace and quiet, that we might be able to hear anew, that we might be able to consider with open hearts and minds, that we might feel your Spirit move amongst us, that we might come to understand more fully. We offer this prayer in Christ's name, amen. When you are sitting at home, enjoying your favorite television show, and you see a commercial for CARE or for the Christian Children's Fund telling you that for just pennies a day, you can help a child in a distant part of the world, what do you see? When someone comes up to you on the street and asks for spare change or for help in getting something to eat, what do you see? I think the answer to that question varies depending upon who you ask. Most of us want to help if we can. Most of us are willing to share what we have with people who are in need. But the fact of the matter is that we've all probably heard stories at one time or another that make us question whether we're really helping or whether we're simply being taken advantage of. A minister I know in South Carolina once had a man stop by her church and ask for help with some gas. He said he was traveling and somehow had lost his wallet. He was low on fuel and didn't have money for gas to make it the 100 miles or so to his hometown. So she met him at the gas station down the street, filled his tank, and sent him on his way. She thought that it was a bit odd, though, that someone driving an Acura could not afford gas. But she gave him the benefit of the doubt. She did, however, have the presence of mind to quickly jot down his license plate number, and after he drove away, she called the police and found that the car was, in fact, stolen and that she had just inadvertently aided the escape of a wanted criminal. I read in the paper a little while back about a woman whose 4-year-old son, JJ, was dying of brain cancer. Websites were set up to solicit support, and lots of people, mostly strangers, who heard about the little boy's plight on the internet, donated money and gifts to help offset costs associated with his treatments. Firemen and policemen around the country sent patches from their departments because they had heard the boy liked to collect them. In a time of tragedy and deep human need, people stepped up to help. And it would have been a touching story, except that it was all a lie. The mother had made the whole thing up. Her son wasn't really sick, but she convinced everyone, including her own family, and even the boy himself, that he was dying, even going so far as to shave his head to simulate the effects of chemotherapy. Stories like those can just wear you down. And if you're not careful, they can lead you to believe that everyone asking for help is really just another con artist trying to prey on the kindness of strangers, which makes it that much less likely that the next person to ask for help will actually get it. The old adage sounds a note of truth here. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And often folks aren't willing to be fooled twice. It seems like everybody has a story like that. Either it's happened to you or to someone you know. We all really want to help, but no one wants to feel like they've given money or time to someone who didn't really need it. So when we look at the faces of the people in need, it can be hard not to do so through cynical eyes. So when you see someone holding up a sign at an intersection that says, "We'll work for food," what do you see? When the request comes in to help families at the YWCA Family Center shelter, in your mind's eye, what do you see? Do you see a sympathetic person who just needs a hand, or a crafty person trying to game the system? Most likely your experiences will color how you answer that question. Andre Bauer, who's a former lieutenant governor of my home state of South Carolina, rather notoriously compared helping the poor to feeding stray animals. In a town hall meeting in 2010, Mr. Bauer said, quote, "My grandmother was not a highly educated woman, but she told me as a small child to quit feeding stray animals. You know why? Because they breed. You're facilitating the problem if you give an animal or a person ample food supply. They'll reproduce, especially ones that don't think too much further than that. And so what you've got to do is you've got to curtail that type of behavior. They don't know any better. End quote. And while I think few people would seriously consider a human being in need to be the same as a stray animal, how we see one another influences drastically how we treat one another. If we see someone who asks for help as undeserving, as less than human, as a potential scam artist, that's exactly how we'll treat them. But our New Testament passage this morning reminds us that when we encounter people in need, we are actually meeting Jesus, which is a radical notion, isn't it? In this story of sheep and goats, Jesus draws a somewhat disturbing distinction between those who feed the hungry, welcome the homeless, clothe the naked, and visit the sick and imprisoned, and those who do not. The sheep who are selected for eternal reward weren't trying to serve Jesus. They were just doing what they were taught to do. And they are here stunned to learn that in their willingness to be generous to those in need, they've actually been doing acts of kindness to Jesus. And conversely, those who are designated goats weren't trying to reject Jesus either, but they are nonetheless shocked to learn that when they refused basic human kindness to those in need, they were refusing that hospitality to Jesus himself. Which doesn't mean we should feed the hungry and visit the sick and imprisoned just so we can score points with God and get into heaven. It means that when we look on the faces of those who've been caught up in cycles of poverty, or who suffer from physical breaking down of their own bodies, or who have made mistakes, we should look upon them as members of Christ's own family, and we should treat them that way. When I was a seminary student in Richmond, Virginia, I volunteered for a time at the Fan Free Clinic. The clinic provided free medical services to low-income folks who lived in and around downtown Richmond. I worked the front desk, so I got to talk to just about everybody who came in. One day, a young woman came in looking for information. I directed her to the appropriate brochures, and she thanked me, took what she needed, and left. She was just one of probably 100 people that I saw that day that came through the doors, but I was struck by how much she resembled my sister. She had the same eyes and the same color hair, and her face was shaped the same way. And I found myself worrying about her afterwards, hoping that she had some place to go and that she would be okay. I reflected on that the rest of the afternoon, and I began to realize that even though she was not really my sister, she was surely somebody's sister or daughter or mother or wife. Somebody somewhere was probably worrying about her too. And I think that's what's at the heart of this passage, that people we may dismiss as unimportant are absolutely important to God. Just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. Every day when I drop Will Gray off at school, I watch him walk into the building and I say a little prayer. I say, please God, let the world be nice to him today. I know the world can be a hard place, and all I really want is for others to see my children the way I do and to treat them with the love and respect that I believe they are worthy of. And I believe that's what Jesus is expressing here in this passage as well, that everyone is worthy of love and respect, and everyone is worthy for us to care about. And to say that we love Jesus and then reject the members of his family, well, that would be absurd. Which is also at the heart of the Old Testament passage we read this morning. Isaiah chastises the people of Israel for obeying the rules about worship and fasting, but then dealing unjustly with their workers and with the poor. In Eugene Peterson's The Message translation that was read from today, God says to the people, what I'm interested in seeing you do is sharing your food with the hungry, inviting the homeless poor into your homes, putting clothes on the shivering ill-clad, being available to your own families. Do this and the lights will turn on and your lives will turn around at once. See, there are some things in the Judeo-Christian heritage, in our Judeo-Christian heritage, that go all the way back to the most ancient beginnings of our faith, to the very earliest days when our ancestors first became dimly aware of God's presence in our midst. And one of those consistent threads is that the way we love and serve God is by loving and serving God's people. We know that. It's not new to us. And what we find here in this story of the sheep and the goats is the recurring notion that everyone is a child of God and deserving of the basic necessities of life, that every person, no matter how rich or how poor, how powerful or how inconsequential in our view of things, should get the same consideration, the same benefit of the doubt as we would give to Jesus. Now, does that mean we should never ask questions of those we help? Or that we shouldn't try to be responsible with our limited resources? No. But it does demand an attitude change in our approach to serving those in need. It means we don't work from an assumption of dishonesty. It means we make every effort to help. It means we give everyone the benefit of the doubt until a person proves they do not deserve it. It means that when a person presents as being in need of our help, we try to help as best we can. Because I firmly believe with everything that is in me that God will judge us much more harshly for refusing to help a brother or sister in need out of fear of being cheated or lied to than God will judge us for helping 10 people who did not need our help in an effort to help one that did. How might the world be different if we tried to see Jesus in everyone we meet? How might we respond to issues of hunger and homelessness if we saw the hungry and homeless person was Jesus? How would we respond to the lack of access to adequate health care faced by so many people in this country if we saw that the crisis affected Jesus? How might we react to news of tragedies like the typhoon that struck the Philippines last week if we looked at them as though the person most desperately affected was Jesus? God has blessed us with so much, with resources to live, with talents and instincts and minds and intellects and vision to make good choices, to envision wondrous things and to engineer solutions to challenging problems. Our call and our responsibility as disciples is to use those gifts God has given us for the ministry to which God has called us. To be sure, when we share, we must share wisely, but we must share. When we give, we must give responsibly, but we must give. When we make use of our gifts and talents, we must be sure to do so efficiently and effectively, but we must use them. And when we do, will we make mistakes? Yep. Will we give to folks who don't need it sometimes? It is almost a certainty. Will we run the risk of directing limited resources to places where they are not needed and fail to send them to places where they are? Sometimes, yes. Will you work hard to provide for your family and wind up helping someone who makes bad decisions and doesn't work very hard at all? It'll probably happen to you at least once in your life, if it hasn't already. But these things are risks inherent in loving and being in community with other human beings. They are risks. They are not excuses. So taking into account the risks and the rewards and everything in between, in the final analysis, the question that matters most is this: when we look upon the faces of the ones Jesus calls the least of these, who do we see? Just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. To God be all glory, honor, power, and dominion in this world and in the world that is to come. Amen.